Yeah, and everybody, welcome. We are happy to have you here with our presentation with our awesome Delbert Anderson. I'm going to turn our time over to Delbert. Usually I put together an introduction of sorts, but I'm going to let Delbert introduce himself because I'm going to butcher it, I know. So thank you, Delbert. I'm going to switch the camera over to you
Alrighty.
and take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, Delbert Anderson, yun chef, bit atni initial class shit bash chain, kintla cheatney dash che 20 cheatney dash nelle. Delbert Anderson, I was born right here, Shiprock, New Mexico. Currently live in Kirtland. I am a jazz musician. I've been doing it since 2013 now. It is my full-time job. 2013 is when I took the plunge. I was working nights at the San Juan Regional Medical Center and decided that I wanted to do do something that I went to school for. So 2013 ended up making the full jump into this arts career, or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot going on. So today I just want to cover a little bit about me, but wanted to give you sort of a point of reference on sort of what this title of the workshop is, what's jazz got to do with it. And in my case, it has everything to do with it. And I'm going to kind of take you down sort of a history, just so you know where all of these things are coming from, because I get it all the time. It's like, what is a Diné man doing playing jazz trumpet? Like, it's so far-fetched. But, after kind of looking into some of the histories and why we, not only just the Diné people, but a lot of tribes all over the states were introduced to Western instruments like tuba, trombone, almost like marching instruments, it was due to these sort of like boarding schools. And so it's not too far-fetched as to why many of us have knowledge of playing some of these Western instruments. So, all righty. Well, I just wanted to give a brief history here. The boarding schools is what introduced Western instruments to us as Diné people and all other tribes in the States. 1600s is when you start to see some of the very first boarding schools, and a lot of these, boarding schools were just basically general knowledge of how to take care of yourself, how to live. Obviously, it grew among the years, but 1819, I think that's when you start hearing, those are the boarding schools that we're familiar with today. Was due to the Civilization Fund Act, which basically meant we're going to try and civilize the Native Americans, so that's kind of where it comes. And so music and Western instruments were introduced to students in the boarding schools. To be civilized was to also be educated in like an art form. So when thinking of art and, you kind of put it together like, oh, playing an instrument is something very creative in art. So this idea of playing music in that time was just sought as a very good idea. So very early on in all of these boarding schools, music was implemented in those programs. And so after completing a boarding school, usually the student had two choices. One, they would either continue their education going on to university, or two, they simply return home. So those were kind of the options that were given to, a lot of the Native Americans who went through these boarding schools. And you might think 1600s is a very long time ago, but I found a few articles in Santa Fe. Some of the cathedral music that was played, they list Navajo man and an Apache man playing Baroque trumpet back then. And so when you think about it, it was they were already playing music as early as then. So now I just want to give a few examples of some of these, like the Native Americans that went through this boarding school system, but ended up being very, very successful. The first one, he's from Nahodashkij, which is very close to Crown Point, New Mexico. His name is Jacob Casimiro Morgan. He was famous for his classical cornet playing, 1879 to 1950. That kind of gives you an idea of how long ago it was. If you look at the picture with the band, he's the one that's standing right behind the big bass drum. So it was Crown Point. Pretty much a Crown Point boarding school that he was in charge of teaching music there. Jacob C. Morgan, you might have heard of him as he was also one of the Navajo Nation presidents, head of council back then. He was also a minister, he was a carpenter, he was a music educator, but most of all, he was a very professional classical trumpet player or cornetist back then. people were captains, the different military bands were like always wanting him. So there's a lot of letters that are like, we need him to play here, we need him to play here. And he also helped, develop, I believe the band is still in this area, the Navajo Nation band. He was one of the forefathers of getting that together here. So, his history is huge in this area, all over the place. Grand Junction, Ignacio, Shiprock, Gallup, Tohatchee, Noshchitty, Window Rock, Albuquerque. He was winning all of these band competitions with his group from Crown Point. And so it just shows how at what, the like high-end education he received in order to, just be very prolific through his entire career. Another one is John Coon Sioux Indian. He played tuba 1882 to 1962. They called him Red Cloud, and his nickname was Sousa's Sioux, is because he actually landed a spot in the John Philip Sousa band. And at the time, the John Philip Sousa band was like the band to be in, just because of marching, the military, and back then, marching band music was like the popular music. And so John Kuhn was another one who, continued his education. There's a lot of documents out there when he was at Haskell doing all of these different types of, in different brass bands and running bands and having solos, and as a tuba player, very, very rare to do, but he was just that good to be in the band. Jacob C. Morgan would later on be featured with the John Philip Sousa band in the St. Louis World Market, I think in like 1901 or 1906, somewhere around there. But yeah, all of these guys are kind of coming around the same era. And lastly, Russell Moore, they called him Big Chief. Pima, but I know he's from the Pima tribe, but I know they don't like being called Pima. Instead, it's the Akamel Odim. That's what they like to be called, rather than, because I think the Spanish is what named him Pima, and they don't really like that. But Russell Moore was a trombone player, and he's there on the right side. And 1912 to 1983. The cool thing about Russell Moore is he was called Big Chief, but he was called Big Chief that was sort of his nickname. But what's his name? Louis Armstrong, forefather of jazz. He played with him, and he played with him in one of his albums called Hello Dolly. It's the most famous album, and in this album, you can hear him say, "Take it, Big Chief, take it." And so that's when he started soloing. So cool. I got to meet his nephew a while back at ASU, and he told a lot of stories about him. Immediately when he was done with college, he ended up going to Chicago and started to learn jazz there with just, Chicago is a big jazz town. And so he just went in and started playing jazz and ended up playing with one of the forefathers of jazz, Louis Armstrong. So as you can see, like marching band music, classical music, and jazz music, there was there was a Native American there at the top that was playing with these guys. So I always thought it's very cool. Now for me, 1995, Kirtland, I went to school. I was in fourth grade, Grace B. Wilson. There was a assembly that was going on, and they brought in a jazz trio. And right before we are to choose our instruments, they would bring in this band, and they would kind of demonstrate different things. So, I was sitting there right in front, like front row, and it was a trombone player, a bass player, and a drummer, and just three of them. And the trombone player at the very end said, music comes from inside us. It doesn't come from the sheet music. So he turned his music stand around, because he was reading sheet music the whole time, but he turned it around at the end, and everyone was like, "Oh no, what's going to happen?" And he just started wailing and playing and going crazy. And the band came in, and everyone was just like super impressed, like hands down. And then afterwards, like, that's really what I wanted to do. And at the very end, he said what he was doing was improvising. And from that moment on, I was like, oh man, that's what I want to do. That was so cool. That was amazing. It kind of blew my mind. So the very next day, I went and tried to play trombone, but I wasn't able to make a note on it. And so the people that were there were like, maybe you should go try something with a smaller mouthpiece, because the trombone is like that big and goes over your whole mouth, and a trumpet is, a lot smaller. It's only that big. And so when I went over and they gave this horn to me, they were like, try to play a few notes. And they just showed me kind of how to play. They're like, you do that. And I was like, okay. And so I did this. I went, and they're like, yay, you're a trumpet player. So, so really, I mean, that's how I got into music. And once they told me that, I believed them. And that's kind of what got me into music. But it wasn't because of like the shiny instruments or all of this. It was really because what the guy said. He said what I was doing was called improvisation, and kind of the words that stuck with me was like music comes from inside us, doesn't come from, the sheet. And so I always thought that was like the proper way of playing music, and so that kind of like still to this day, it's still like is here with me. Like that's what I want to do. So, like I was saying, in 2013 is when I sort of took the full plunge into this music career. Started a group called the Delbert Anderson Trio, and that lasted from 2013 to 2022. Unknowingly, I knew that we had to be, if I wanted to do this as a career, I had to be like set apart from everyone else. Like I couldn't just be a jazz musician because there are like millions of jazz musicians all over the world, and a lot of them are a lot better than I am because they probably grew up with jazz, or they studied with the jazz greats and so forth. And so I started kind of looking deep into my own culture and found a set of songs called the Diné spinning songs. And I started to look around, and at the time, this was probably 2013-ish, around there. And I noticed that the word like appropriation started coming up a lot, and there was a lot of things going on. So just to be safe, I had to ask my elders if it was okay. And my elders are from like just what they call the farm road, kind of like down the farm road area. Also have some out in like Cove and Red Valley area. And so when I say elders, that's kind of the areas that I'm speaking of. And so I asked the elders if it was okay to play some of these songs, and if it was okay to start fusing some of this with jazz. And they said, if you had asked us 10 years earlier, we would have said no, because they said we're trying to keep everything sacred, protect everything. But they said today, a lot of our youth are no longer interested in our stories or our music, our songs. So they said if it can shine any light onto it, sort of with a different lens that has a more youth vibe, they said it was totally fine. And they said something that I had to understand was, they said that, we did what we had to do in our time, and you have to do what you have to do in your time. So it was very, very neat to speak with them on that subject. And so I got the approval to start kind of fusing these sounds together. But while I was with them, I started to hear a lot of stories of like the long walk, and also, on the sort of the way of life, the pathway, Honjon. It seemed like that's all we talked about every time I would visit the elders talking about music. They'd always come back to the long walk and Honjon. And so it started to really dawn on me, especially later on after we were kind of getting established. So, when I talk about like what jazz has to do with it, and this is sort of something like sort of the way I was connecting, sort of our culture and, African American culture. And I kind of like broke it up into two subjects, the long walk and Honjon, and also slavery and improvisation. Pretty deep things to talk about, but basically, if we look on the left side, the long walk and Honjon is basically the Native American experience. The long walk, which was the tragic history that we have, from Arizona to Fort Sumner, the forced relocation. When the elders would always say, when a person is pushed to their limits, like all the way to the ground to where there's nothing left, they said something's going to come out. Like it could either be pain or, there's many things. Whatever is inside you is definitely going to come out when you're, broken. But they started talking about this idea of expression, like what expressions came out of that experience, of the Native American experience, the long walk. They started talking about new songs were being formed at that point. The new foods were being developed. New ways of art started to come out. And this was all after, being broken. And basically, Honjon was learned so that they could survive. And, those are some very, bittersweet, but like very creative and beautiful things that came out of that sort of tragic, depression. And then when you look on the other side, something that I love is, jazz. Slavery and improvisation, was all about the Black experience, and slavery obviously was, an event that many of our African ancestors went through. But when you kind of think of it the same way the elders were thinking about it, the expression that came from this harshness was basically improvisation, and which led to jazz music. There's stories and diaries out there that you can find that, when they were beaten all day, some people were, even like punished. Family members were losing other family members due to talk back. And the only time to express was way in the middle of the night when, their owners couldn't hear them. And so they would go and find a barn or a place where, they were kind of hidden, and they would start to cry, they would start to moan, but somehow that kind of formed into song form. A lot of the spirituals that we have today that are like sung in church and everything, some of those were directly come from those expressions of back then. And it's just amazing. And later on, after, we kind of know the story of like New Orleans, where it was like a culture clash, and when that would kind of get out into the open, or someone might have said, hey, remember what you were singing that last time? You should sing it for these guys. And it would just start to build at that point, meaning like all different cultures were kind of contributing to this jazz music, but it came from, the Black experience. And so when you're kind of looking at it again, improvisation had to be learned for them to endure. Both of them, both sides, those who were in the long walk and those who were in the slavery, both had to really utilize this idea of improvisation, which is why I feel like I really cling on to it. So improvisation as a life skill. And I'm just going to kind of read these. We're going to kind of go through these really quick. But experience is key to life situations. Basically, the more experience you have, the better off you're going to be. And I kind of relate that back to music, as music vocabulary is to improvisation. Music vocabulary, you can kind of think of it as, when we talk to each other, like right now, I'm not reading off of a script or anything. I mean, you don't go, hello, friend, how are you doing? You're able to learn words to where you can start putting it together on your own. That's kind of what music vocabulary means too. You learn different notes, you kind of know how they can go together, and therefore you can like improvise. So same thing, the more experience you have, the better off you're going to be. Time continues forward through any situation, as improv always needs to move. One of the rules in improvisation is that you have to keep it going no matter what. If someone says, hey, how are you doing? And if you just say nothing and walk off, like that's it. You're done, So improv, you have to keep going no matter what. And I think that's what I was trying to refer to was time continues forward through any situation. There's a lot of, just challenges, here on the res and everywhere else. And one of the worst things we can do is just stop or give up when things get hard. And so it's kind of that mentality of the Native American experience and the Black experience is that we have to keep moving no matter what. Even if it's super slow, at least we're still moving, because once you stop, then that's when things start to really get in trouble. So, and same with music, as improv always needs to move. If I just stop during a solo, I mean, stopping is cool and it's great, but if you don't play anything else, it's like, why are you even there? So that's kind of what I was trying to relate it to. Creativity gives situations alternative. So a lot of times, I guess the easiest way to say is like when we run into a failure, try not looking at it as a failure, but just look at it as, okay, I need to find a different way there, rather than just hitting fail and saying, okay, that didn't work. But no, it just means that there has to be another way around it. So as creativity gives endless doors for music. And so if we kind of run into a jam say soloing and you kind of like forget what you have to do. Again, moving is so important. So we might just start playing random notes to see where it goes. If we stop there, that doesn't mean that the solo's done and the solo's ruined. It's like, no, you can build from that and you try to find your way around the music. Dave Brubeck once says, he says, I like to corner myself in music so I can to see if I can get myself out, you know. So he likes putting himself in trouble musically to see if he can get out. And so, you know, it kind of speaks to that idea of, you know, continuing movement, and failure is not meaning that, you know, you didn't do right. It just means that there's another way to it. And so finally kind of came to this idea of Honjo was the outcome of the native experience, you know, the long walk, what we're talking about, and jazz was the outcome of the black experience. And so it was like Honjo was the healing for the long walk, and jazz was the healing of the, you know, the slavery times. And so that's kind of how I kind of look at music in general, you know, when I'm playing jazz. And I just want to kind of reinforce what I'm saying. I wanted to do a little activity really quick. So everyone have a paper and pen now? Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 seconds, and I just want you to scribble all over the paper as much as you can in 2 seconds, okay? Ready, go. 1, 2, stop. Okay, now hand that paper over to someone else, meaning don't have your own. Just have someone else's. Yeah. Oh, okay. Everyone has a different sheet, right? Okay. So now we'll give like 2 minutes, and I want you to create something familiar, draw something familiar out of what you have there. So try to make it recognizable to others and get 2 minutes, and you can draw over it. Just don't erase anything. That's why I said pen, use a pen. All right, 2 minutes starting now. All righty. So let's go see what we have. Kittens, right? Yarn, kittens and yarn. Awesome. That was a good one. Let's see what we have here. Almost the same thing, right? Is that a cat?
Yeah, cat.
Cat. Mountain, sun, cat. That's 2 cats already. See, it's like long hair, face, looks like sitting down with a striped t-shirt or a skirt. Yeah, awesome. What about, is it this way? Okay, what is it? Waterfall? Waterfall, trees, rocks, right? Is that awesome? Waterfall kind of looks like up in the mountains somewhere. And then, all right. What about this one? Butterfly, right? Awesome. Awesome. Those are really good. There's usually when we do that activity, there's like a lot of snakes, clouds, you know. But so kind of going back to what I was trying to explain is that one, the, you know, jazz in general, especially like today, you know, what is called jazz standards. Basically, it's like a lead sheet. It just shows you the notes that you have to play to play the song. But that's all that's written. There's no like play loud, play soft, or improvise here, or do this. It's just like a very generic sheet of instructions, and that's what you have to go off of. So basically, they put something in front of you, and they expect you to elaborate on it or make it more than what it is. When you kind of look at it in sort of life, what you guys just did and demonstrated is something that's very powerful, that, you know, very easy just drawing it. But what happened was you were given something that you had no control over. Basically, you were put in a very chaotic situation. Like, you just looked at the scribbles and you're like, what do I do with this? And then someone told you, like, okay, you have to make something out of it now. And so you started putting on your creative thinking. You started kind of looking at all angles, or like, what do I have to do here? And for some of us, we probably had to really struggle and think about it. Or some of us might have been doing this for a long time, and you're like, oh, I know what to do. I got this, you know. And so, but what's so powerful is that you took something that was not yours, something that you were instructed to do, and you made it work. You got by, you got through it. And so that's what I mean when, you know, running into very difficult situations. If you have the mindset to treat it the same way you just treated this simple activity, you're going to be strong. You're going to be super strong going through this entire life's experience. When you think of it in the terms of the long walk, our ancestors, the ancestors didn't really have a choice. They were given foods that weren't made yet. They were told to march no matter what. In fact, you couldn't say no back then. If you did, that was basically death at that point. So you had to do something. And that's what I mean by, that's when you start to hear these words like honjo coming up, like beauty, balance, harmony, like dealing with what is given to you, not being offended with what happens to you. All of these teachings started to come up because of this practice. And the same with, the Black experience, almost same circumstances, and just to where if there was disagreement, that was death or that was punishment. It was very unfair, but the same thing, improvisation kind of expression started to come up to where they were able to handle these things or endure it. But one thing that both sides, the Native American and Black experience, that they kind of both shared was they both started looking into the future rather in that moment. So they were all about how is our future going to benefit from what's going on right now? What can we do now that's going to, continue on later? And so it was more of a survival tactic for them in that area. But as, we move on through history and things are starting to kind of look up, so to say, the things are getting better. There's no longer any of us that are, kind of in that suffering system. There's plenty that still are, but I mean, it is kind of in some way moving in a little better direction. But our goals, our way of thought is a lot different than those back then. They were making sure that we had a life here. And so, it all goes back to, our ancestors and those who really, endured and did made the sacrifice for us to be here. And so that's what I mean about, this idea of making something out of nothing is really cool. And that's what improvisation is you're making something that with the tools that you have currently. You're not trying to do something you can't, you're doing something that you can do. And so I thought it'd be really cool to kind of give a demonstration of what I'm kind of talking about here. So when you're talking, I guess, about experience, if I ask the child, like, play like you're in love, the child's going to say, ew, I never been in love. I don't know what love is, But if you tell a grown-up, like, hey, play like you're in love, they'll be like, oh, yeah, I know what that feels like, So, experience is everything. And I feel like the more experiences you have, I always like to say artists that have been through a lot, that have a lot of experience in that area, they always make the best artists because they can really express those things that, a lot of people never felt before. But this one here, I thought I'd just play this song. I'm going to play it just like I'm reading the music. Kind of, this is like getting the bunch of scribbles in my face right now. So I'm just going to play it like as it were on the sheet music. And then I'm going to play it with my creativity and my spin and everything. So this is just straight, just as the sheet is written. Okay? So that was kind of just reading the sheet music, but with experience and knowing what the song is called Nearness of You. So yeah, this is kind of like my version. Yeah, so you hear the difference, right? It's a lot more personal, or it's like, yeah, like feels like the nearness of you that, rather than a bunch of notes. And so, taking that whole idea of experience and music vocabulary, that's really what makes jazz really unique is, improvisation. I mean, I played what I know, I wasn't trying to play anything crazy or, just kind of dealing with what I had at the moment. And that's really what jazz is working in the moment. And the more you work in the moment, I think there's less disappointment when you work that way. And if you think more of the classical end, like, oh, I have to play it like this, or it has to be perfect, that can cause a lot of stress, which is why I don't play classical music too. So I know Change Lab is very, they put entrepreneurship at the forefront. So I thought I'll just go through really quick a little bit about, I guess, the business side, because unknowingly, I didn't know I was creating a business when I first started. But here are some things that I feel like really pushed my career forward. One is, caring about your craft, and these are more personal ideas, and then the second idea is more in a business format. So care about your craft. You want to do something that you love, rather than you feel like it's work. And for me, it was music and improvisation from the guy playing the trombone. Like, that was it. That's what I wanted to do. And so therefore, that's what I'm doing now. In the business sense, what do you offer that no one else offers? It really depends. Like, if you're going to go into beating, like, what makes you different than all the other beaters, So you kind of have to have that mindset of what's going to set you apart, basically what's going to be your product. And number two, this is throughout your entire career, seek mentorship. I know there's a lot of people that just want to do it on their own, but mentorship is such a big thing. Basically, you're creating a plan for yourself at that moment. You're asking others about their experience so you don't mess up like they did, or, that kind of thing. You could save yourself years just seeking a mentor than doing trial and error, which is what I did for about 13 years and kind of still doing it. But, the mentorship is super important. I can't stress this one enough. Practice your craft. There has to be some type of moment when you're trying to level up on everything, your skill set, your skill levels. If you're just doing it and not practicing it, you're just going to level and slowly decline. Talent is like a given, especially in this world. I had a teacher who always says this. He says, true mastery is consistent contact with the subject matter. So the more I have my hands and my lips on this trumpet, the more mastery I'm going to get out of it, the better I'm going to get. But if I leave it alone for days and months and I come and try to play, I'm going to forget how to play. I won't be able to play anymore. So talent is a must, when you start having your own career. Another thing that I feel like this was kind of done sort of unknowingly on my part, but the first thing I did was I started meeting all of the business owners in Farmington area, Kirtland area, and I started to ask, like, what do you guys need? Just getting to know them. Networking is what I was doing, and creating friendships with my community. Once it felt like I had a very strong relationship with everyone, I started to implement my practice. Like, hey, I play music. Would you like some music, here for this? Or if you're having an event, can you hire me? And started off very small. And that kind of got around. And, the cool thing about being from a small community is there's only a few people, so you can really literally talk to everyone and know everyone. And basically, building your roots to establish your business. That's basically what you're doing on the business end of things. And it's so easy to go out and, make things happen at that point. You hear a lot of people just cold calling or cold emailing, and they're like, it's not working, but it's not working because you don't know those individuals. They're not going to answer an email or a phone call from someone they don't know, So it's important to kind of meet them in person and build that relationship. And then expand, basically go beyond your community, search for additional help, conferences, networks, grants, that kind of thing. That's basically how I built my career. And the two most, important things that I feel like are always there is, just the honesty and being humble in front of, all of the people that you meet. Honesty and being humble really opens you up. It makes you very trustworthy to those who probably never met you before. And so that's kind of like a key kind of characteristics that you should have moving forward, especially when you get to conferences and you're starting to meet all of these different people. Yeah, and be yourself, have your own story, where you're coming from. This was just to kind of give you an idea of like mentorship and how hardcore I was into all of this. So notice there's a lot of trumpet in there, and that's me working on my craft. I took lessons from a lot of these, but you can also look and kind of see professionalism, social interaction, mental health, policy language, time management, marketing specialists, grants and funding specialists, finance management, community arts engagement, navigating grants and booking conferences. I had a mentor for all of those subjects, and that's what really built my career, is having all of these things and knowing these things, that some of these things exist are crazy. You don't really see anyone going to a mentor to be like, how do I engage socially, But, it was a thing of mine because I was starting to go to a lot of conferences, and it's hard to, like, you just feel like a little nugget there, like, man, I'm so out of my league right now. But, after taking some of these, mentorships and like having these councils nearby, it gets easier and you get really good at it. 2010, Gavin Bondi, he's the one who kind of made when I transferred from a full-time job to start doing what I'm doing now, music, he's the one who set that all up for me. There is a good way, kind of like make sure you don't have any debt, make sure you don't have any kids, don't have a wife. I broke all those rules at the time. So it was very hard. The first 3-4 years were the hardest years of my life in this whole music career because, I wasn't doing it according to like what was the easiest way to go about it. Gavin, in other words, he didn't have any children. He might have had a girlfriend then. He was paying off his debts. He didn't really have anything to pay for. And so having a music career with his life set up was a lot easier than mine. I had to go through a lot. I had to pay off a lot of stuff, student loans, you name it. There was just a bunch of stuff there. But there is, right and wrong ways of going about these things. And I think a lot of times artists don't really think of that. They just kind of jump in and see what happens. And it's like, oh, like I made $100 this month, but I should be making like 1,500. So how does that work out? How does that balance work out? So, it's just important to talk to these people and build up your skills on kind of all of these levels. And I'm just going to go ahead and really kind of talk about the projects that I have. To this day, Delbert Anderson Quartet from 23 to now. I was a trio to about 2022, and then we added a person and we changed some of the personnel, so now we're a quartet. That's kind of like my main income, is playing with this group. I also have this 4.5-year composition called The Long Walk, and this was kind of inspired from talking with the elders. So this piece actually started back November 1st, 2023, and I think we're note number 27 is coming up. There's 50 notes total. And the last note is on June 1st, 2028. Basically, each time we play a note, it's an actual piece, but it's spread over 1,674 days, or like 4.5 years. And so each time we play a note, there's a fact that you read about the Long Walk. And there's about 80 to 85 people who are currently doing this along with me. So it's just another way of creating awareness. And what the elders were kind of split in two. One side of the elders were like, we don't talk about the Long Walk anymore, don't talk about it. And the other ones were saying, we need to talk about it, we need to retell the story of it because it was wrong. And so I kind of went with the other elders who were kind of for retelling the story. And so that's basically what we're doing note by note. Co-director of this fabulous group, Julia Keefe Indigenous Big Band. There's Julia Keefe, she's from the Nez Perce tribe. That started back in 22 and still going to this day. They're actually playing in Massachusetts next week. It's an 18-piece all Indigenous jazz band. everyone is from different areas, even from Canada, First Nations to South America, and a lot of them are from the States. And so, kind of thinking that, oh man, I'm probably the only native jazz artist, like there's tons, there's many. And as we see in the history segment, there's probably tons of them already, but we're kind of bringing that back. It's nothing new. There was a lot of indigenous big bands back then, especially during that era of big band, 20s to 40s, that kind of thing. And something that's coming up is I actually wrote a musical called Walking in Harmony, written by myself and Julia, directed by Jennifer Bobby Wash, and premieres June 18, 2026. And so it's kind of like my first intro into, I guess, theater. So there's actors, I wrote all the music, and it's gonna, we'll see how it goes. So before we go, I'm just gonna share every time I meet with the elders, they would always say these two things to me: always be in service to one another, and always treat everyone as if they are at their highest potential. Service to one another, my grandfather always used to say, after you say hello to someone and introduce yourself, the next thing you should ask is, do you need any help with anything, or how can I help? The second one, treat everyone as if they're at their highest potential, is the way the elders kind of put it was, if you see a homeless man, you want to treat this homeless man like they have many mansions. So basically, you're not taking in directly what you're seeing, but you're giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're a perfect human being. So that kind of surpasses all of these things. And last but not least, the elder, where those two teachings came from, he always used to say, you can't have beauty unless you understand balance and harmony. And those two teachings came from trying to understand balance and harmony. And if you can do those two things, they say you can literally walk in beauty at that point. And so we'll do a little quick game here, because every time I would visit them, they would always say this to me. They'll say, Delbert, let's see if you have honjon today. And I'm like, all right. And so the elder would say, think of someone you don't like, right? If you have someone in your mind that you don't like, the elder would say, you don't have honjon. So, it's a tough thing, because we get angry really quick, especially looking at Facebook and you're just getting mad, but it's a tough thing. And, they would always say that's the true path of honjon, being non-offended, helping others, no matter what the circumstances, you're going to keep going forward and pushing with positivity. You can go to my website, kind of see a lot more things, and there's my email. But concludes the presentation. Thank you guys so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I was curious about if you're able to speak on this, the protocol and how you go about conveying your idea about what you want to write about when it comes to certain potentially sensitive topics like native experiences, ideas. If you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on what that protocol was like, and maybe what were some obstacles and opportunities that you saw in that.
Yeah, well, especially when talking about the suffering and all the tragic histories that we all have, literally everyone has it, it's been something that is still to this day, I haven't really found a good way to put it. We had many what do you call them, infinity groups that meet, and and we try to talk about what is this idea of Indigenous and African American, what are the similarities, and it always ends up in a fight, an argument, we suffered more than you guys, and it's just man, we don't need to go there, so it's very, very difficult. And the way I've been trying to navigate it is put it through the art form music, instead of going directly to the tragedies that we went through. I think that's why I was trying to explain, hey, this jazz, the Black experience, Native American experience, I get where it's coming from. I'm not saying it comes from the same place, but it's very similar into the idea of, like I was saying, the elder, when humans basically push down to their limits, what's going to come out of it. And so far, when looking at different histories, there was always something creative that came from it. There was always something like a new idea that formed. It wasn't just like death and that's it. Of course that happened a lot, but the protocols is, it's hard to talk about it and not offend anyone. And I feel like you're just going to have to go for it. But also I think what you can do as like the individual who's trying to portray something like that, talking about those types of topics, is I think having a good track record like of your own. That way people kind of know you and they know that it's not coming from a different place. It's very hard. And like I said, I don't really feel like we've nailed it on the head yet. I mean, I'm still in contact with many different artists who are talking about the same things, and a lot of times these conversations don't go well, but it's something that it needs to be talked about, but it's so difficult because it takes a certain individual who can deal with all the I guess negativity and all that, and try to just stay clean-headed when talking about it is so difficult too, because my grandfather, he was from Abiquiu, and his grandmother, maybe mother, was probably in the long walk at the very end of it. And so he just ended up residing in Abiquiu after that, after the Bosque Redondo thing. And when I think about it, it's like, man, I'm so glad that whoever was there just ended up agreeing to do whatever the military and whatever they were forced to do, because if they didn't, that would have been like the end of my line and I wouldn't be here because of it. And so when you like really relate it like that, it's like, man, this is crazy. But yeah, it's I don't know if there's like really a protocol yet, but I know there are a lot of people that are trying. Like when you go to like conferences, and like especially art conferences, they like to talk a lot about that kind of stuff, especially when the artists get together. And most of the time, if it's artist to artist, I tend like they can kind of gravitate and they can kind of connect a little better. But if it's someone else from like, if it's like an artist and maybe an administrator, or if it's just general public and artists, and the idea and like where they come from, man, it's just like everyone starts tearing at each other. Because I think the last one I was a part of, it was like we had people from Mexico, Australia, like New Zealand, Hawaii, and we were talking about this, like the different tragedies that were going on, and like it was more not about the tragedies, but like what came after and how it influenced like different communities and arts and why we are like this and all that kind of stuff. And then there was someone like they were white, and they said, well, we had our own like massacres too back then, and it's like, yeah, like but there was other people that just weren't buying it. They were like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't know anything about it. And it started to get really ugly at that point. So it's really hard still to do anything. And even that was they tried to set up like certain protocols, like, hey, no shaming, or keep the trauma to a minimum. They tried all these rules, but it just like goes through all of them all the time. So yeah, it's a great question. I don't know really, but even when I try it, I mean, there's been a lot of times, especially when doing like the Long Walk project, if there's an elder there who's one of the sides that are like, hey, you're not supposed to talk about that, a lot of them will just get up and walk out. But that probably happened once or twice, maybe twice, I think. But again, they're split, and it really depends on their upbringing and how everything works. And I think that's a really tough one.
Well, thank you, Delbert. We're going to
Awesome.
for the evening, and we will see everybody next time.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, guys.